because it is a pain in the rear end. I'm like, okay, the fact that you don't know that is mind blowing. Can I say Alexa in this room, or do I have to say Echo in this room? Otherwise, it's going to start responding to me.
Welcome, everybody. This is Tuesday Morning Grind, episode number 63. Today, we're going to talk about privacy. And in today's environment, I think public consciousness is generally more aware than it has been in the past in terms of privacy, just because of the use of social media, some of the headlines, the listening devices in people's homes. And if you're in the business world, you've probably already heard about things like GDPR or the different states that have privacy regulations. So needless to say, whether you're at home or at business, privacy is becoming a bigger and bigger topic. So today, our guest is Kate Godfrey, and Kate is a chief compliance officer and privacy officer, has been in the healthcare space a lot, has been a speaker, and an absolute expert in privacy. So Kate, excited to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Kate, maybe we'll start it off. How did you begin a career in privacy? How did you get in this space?
Well, I've been in health law ever since law school, and started on the provider side, being in the hospital space, and so right out of the gate, privacy is definitely part of that. Mm-hmm. It's something that you focus on right away. So I was training employees not only on the compliance side of things, but obviously being in a HIPAA covered entity, privacy was something I learned kind of from day one, mm-hmm. And then actually ventured away from privacy, taking a different perspective when I went into pharma. And it was very interesting, being in the big pharma kind of world for a while, because then you're like scared of privacy. You're like, no, privacy is not us. Like we try to stay away from that, because you don't want all of the big kind of onerous things that come with privacy. And so you kind of stay on the peripheral edges of privacy there. And then with the, coming forth of GDPR and everything in 2018, I think everybody started realizing, okay, we can't hide from it anymore. It's not just, for HIPAA covered entities. Yep. Privacy is a full-time thing that we all have to pay attention to. So with GDPR and CCPA, I think everybody realized privacy impacts all of us. This is a full-time job for everybody. So then it wasn't just like a one-man show for privacy. Also, it was a big department for everybody coming around. But at that time, I had transferred into the world of diagnostics because I, wanted to take on that challenge in my life. And diagnostics is definitely a covered entity. So I was back into privacy full time, all the time, and loving it. So I went from being peripheral to full time.
Yep. I think healthcare was, I would call it, an early adopter of privacy, mm-hmm. largely because of HIPAA here in the US. But then we have the world of diagnostics. Even the COVID passport, I think, it's like even made people think more about the realm of privacy and healthcare and digitization of data. 23andMe, Ancestry.com, all of these companies doing things with genetics and diagnostics. So you obviously live in that world. Beyond compliance, what kind of conversations at the leadership level happen? Like, are y'all thinking about about privacy? Are you thinking about ethics, or is it mostly compliance driven? Are executives asking smart questions about privacy, or are they still kind of trying to educate themselves? Like, where do you think we are as a marketplace or society when it comes to this kind of conversations?
I think kind of all of the above. I mean, it's a big thing about, lead with ethics and compliance will follow. I think really makes sense, because there's a big thing about, sometimes the law says what you have to do, and then mm-hmm. sometimes there's what's the right thing to do. And most of the time, you want to be in that company that follows both paths. But, I think one of the great things is you try to do what's the right thing. But I think what's become so complex about our privacy regime nowadays, and I think it's what so many of us privacy professionals are trying to navigate now, is the privacy laws are becoming so complex that we're all trying to navigate them, and we're still trying to figure out how do we navigate the laws and what's the right thing and do business at the same time, because it's almost like the three paths don't all go in the same direction. if you will. If you look at some of the, recent rulings because of Schrems, it's getting to a point that, we're all trying to figure out how can we do, cross-border transfers?
Yep.
How can we operate in a global kind of environment? Because it's getting, so restrictive. With Austria and, France both, making recent rulings about Google Analytics and
Yep.
transferring data. It's getting to the point where you're like, wait, can we not have European companies use US data providers? What about those companies that have, a foot in both US and Europe? And we have to transport, data across both. Like, how are we supposed to navigate this?
Yeah.
And there's still guidance that hasn't come out. And to your point, are we leading with ethics? Are we leading by what the law says? And when there's gray in both of those, you don't want to find out that you picked the wrong answer when you're trying to do the right thing.
It's weird how privacy, you think, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Schrems 2, that it basically had to do with cross-border data transfers and geolocation of data. Where does data reside? Largely due because of U.S. surveillance apparatus, if you will. There were some concerns that the federal government could access data if it was on U.S. soil. And that's where privacy takes this weird geopolitical spin as well, where maybe you're a company doing something really, really important work, but you have to think about where to actually hold the data because of geopolitics and that kind of thing. Where do you think, when you're sitting in the boardroom with leadership, are they more compliance focused right now, or how aware are they of what's going on in privacy and potential ethics considerations? Do you get a sense that they're thinking about one thing or the other?
Yeah, no, I think definitely they're thinking about privacy. We try to incorporate privacy by design when we're, taking initiatives, when we're at executive team meetings and we're trying to figure out, what projects or initiatives we want to sponsor or, put on our work plan for the year. One of the things that we talk about, and it actually, came up at a recent executive team meeting, looking at our strategy for the year, privacy by design was one of those concepts that we talked about, that for, message to travel, all the way down to the front lines, that privacy by design has to be involved for any projects to really be successful. It can't just be a one and done type of thing. But it's got to be, from minute 1 to, hour 24, that privacy by design has to be, brought into all of our projects. Because if we don't think about it on the front end, it's going to impact business on the latter end of things, because you don't want to, have a team get into either a business negotiation or later into a clinical trial or later into, pharma partnership kind of situation and realize that they hadn't taken into account whether it was a privacy law or some type of privacy safeguard, and realize it wasn't taken into account. And now they're far down the line. And some of those things you can't unwind because maybe it was patient consent or, again, a jurisdictional issue of, cross-border transfers like we're talking about right now, or we're just talking about a minute ago. And because you can't necessarily unwind some of those, it could end up potentially imploding an entire business deal because you didn't think about incorporating privacy on the front end. So it's really important that leadership starts prioritizing privacy on the front end.
I know when I hear people talk about privacy by design, historically, one of the biggest challenges privacy professionals face is getting time with the people who are actually developing the product. So that could be engineers or product owners. Or thinking about bringing something to market. And privacy and really compliance generally is often a tack on. Like you have conversations at the end after it's already built. Whereas privacy by design, if you have some of those during the requirements gathering stage, you can get ahead of that. Have you been successful, or have you seen folks successfully be able to get in the ear of engineering or product before they build?
I think success comes in all different, kind of shapes and sizes. And I think it's really, culture dependent. I'm really fortunate at the company I'm at now because they've really prioritized privacy and compliance. Again, they've made me an executive team member, indicating that they think, hey, privacy and compliance are that important. We need it to have a seat at the table here so that when they're in executive team meetings, that they can be made aware of, hey, what's a privacy or compliance issue, so that they can also cascade those messages down to their team members. Because just like you were saying, I need to be able to get in front of, whether it's my message or with my team members, those engineers. They need to know, what do they need to know, and I need to know, what do I need to know. So it goes both ways. It's not just me pushing my message out, it's them needing to know, well, where are the gaps, and when do I need to get in front of them. So it's a two-way communication street. And so that's why it's great to have that visibility, starting really that tone at the top. And it's not just necessarily the CEO saying privacy and compliance are important, and they say it once and then it's done. It's really walking the walk and making privacy and compliance an important thing, to give it that platform so that everybody has access to it, and making sure that there is room to have that two-way dialogue between privacy and compliance and the different business stakeholders, so that it really allows for that partnership for those different business functions to say, hey, when I've got a question, or I'm going to do this next business initiative or development project, do I know when I need to check in with you, and what step I need to check in before I've passed that go, no go point in the project?
Yep. That's one of the things I hear come up a lot with both security and privacy professionals, is you have to position yourself at the right place in the organization, whether it be a risk council or an ELT or whatever that is, so you can influence the right people at the right time to get decisions made correctly. How have you as an executive been able to get in those positions? Is it just because you're choosing the right companies and they kind of have the the forethought to do so, or are you kind of consciously positioning yourselves and trying to get into the right types of governance structure?
I think it's a little bit of both. Some of it is because not every company is set up that way.
Yep.
And I definitely don't want to, spread the message that it has to be an executive team position for it to be successful, because that is definitely not the case. It just happens to be the structure where
Right.
I'm at right now, and it's working wonderfully. But you can have support at many different levels and it work really well. If you've got a great infrastructure set out, if you've got great partnerships throughout the business, if you've got, business team members who you have visibility across the organization, and they understand how to come to you, when to come to you. You've got line of sight across the organization as to different projects. If you have that visibility, if you can build that in a multi-layer approach, it can be super, super successful. So I think some of it really just depends on the size and structure of the organization, the reach of your departments, your relationships within the different organizational structures that you have, kind of your confidence level and your ability to communicate and reach out. And it's always, no matter how you're structured, a partnership approach. It's never a preaching down approach. That will never be successful. It's always got to be a partnership approach, because the business has to be able to feel that they can come to you at any time. Because sometimes they do come to you a little too late. And so you've got to be able to say, all right, let's figure out, can we right the ship? Can we figure this out?
Yep.
We have to turn the ship around, or, is this something that we can navigate through? And they need to know that it's a safe space to come to you and try to help problem solve, and not feel that you're somebody that they have to avoid because you're just going to say no all the time. They've got to know that they can always come to you.
Yeah, I was talking to a gentleman who's the head of privacy at a Fortune 500 company. And as is typical, privacy is relatively lean. It's like 3-4 folks that are really privacy SMEs at his company. And one of the ways that he structured it to get visibility, I thought was really clever, was they have a risk council that's more executive level. But obviously, all those folks don't always escalate the right things. So he went to each of the major departments, especially the product focused departments, and kind of assigned or worked with someone who had a natural inclination to care about privacy. And he had kind of formally assigned them the privacy champion, as what he called them. And then scheduled like a weekly or monthly touch point or something like that with those individuals, where they would just talk about what they're doing. And he would just listen. And they'll tell him, we're working on this feature, this product. And if something came up that kind of sounded like a privacy concern, he'd be like, oh, well, I need to dig in on that. But it was kind of a command and control function where he had unofficial privacy advocates throughout the business that he was just meeting with periodically to escalate up. And it seemed to be working out really well for him. It was also a really good way to kind of increase privacy awareness throughout the organization without like a training. So I thought that was pretty clever. That's like a 50,000 person company or something like that. So
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
large.
No, I've worked with compliance champions, or I've had the idea of privacy champions in the past, but you have to definitely get to a point where at least your kind of main hub of compliance and privacy is built out, and you've got a good kind of structure there first before you kind of roll out the
Mm-hmm.
others. Because once you kind of have that solid base that everybody gets what, hey, this is what the compliance department is, this is what the privacy department is, this is what they do. We have policies and procedures in place. Everybody kind of gets what that team is. Then you can kind of roll out the next level of, oh, these are our compliance champions and our privacy champions, because then there's kind of that buy-in and support, and then people are excited, and you can make it like that next level team approach. And sometimes you can even make it like a so I've rolled out the like job description for it before, that it's like an added kind of like sense of accomplishment, or like a development opportunity for people who are like looking for development opportunities, but maybe there's no job positions open. And this way it gives them a chance to show leadership within their own peer groups, kind of thing. So there's ways to definitely set it up as like it's a really good thing, and something to strive for, and it's like a positive kind of reinforcement thing throughout the culture of the company. But if you do it too soon and you don't have your main hub ready to go, then people are kind of like chickens with their head cut off, kind of running around like, wait, what are we doing? What are we rolling out?
Yep.
What are we training on, or anything like that? But I totally love the idea. It's awesome.
So from my experience, so we at Risk 360, we mostly work with high growth tech companies. So my sample is biased because of that. But what we typically see is the reason companies prioritize privacy is probably because a regulation said so, such as GDPR, or they're getting a data protection addendum, or they're getting something contractually talking about privacy that's requiring it, and they can't close deals with customers, something like that. There's some dynamic like that that's getting the attention of executives. Now, in your space, in the healthcare space, and specifically diagnostics and genetic information, is that the same thing, or people taking a more proactive approach to privacy from your experience?
More so regulated, and then probably a little proactive. In the healthcare space, we're the second most regulated industry, in the U.S. So we definitely have no shortage of regs coming at us from every which way. So mostly that, there's HIPAA. From the healthcare side, CCPA, GDPR, and now there's the Virginia Consumer Privacy Act, and the Colorado one that we have to look forward to, and new CPRA. So there's again patchwork of privacy laws all over the place for us that we have to kind of navigate. So there's always been laws kind of navigating everything, but I think also to your point of being proactive, I think, especially now, there's such an inherent kind of focus on like the right of privacy, like there's such a big like spotlight on it right now. I've told people who are, going into this like next level career search, or like young people like just out of law school that are starting, and they're like, oh, what career do I want to go into? And what's big right now? And I'm like, privacy is huge right now. It's the next generation. It's where everything is going. And there's no shortage of laws that are going in that, direction. So if you're up for kind of an ever-changing battle, go into privacy. Just because it's such a focus area right now, and people are so kind of protective over everything that's theirs. And the one thing that's always theirs is their information, their data, and so now people are really kind of becoming wise to, well, what can I protect that's mine? And so, yes, there's a lot of laws that regulate it, but then I think, the government's trying to give back to people their own ownership over, hey, you've got a right to this. It's not just where the government used to tell us, hey, you healthcare covered entity, these are the rules that you've got to follow, right?
Yep.
But the advent of like CCPA and all of those giving individuals the right of access and the right to say, hey, you delete my data, or you provide a right of portability to my data, or you give me more access to my data than HIPAA ever did, or you correct my data, or you do this to my data. I think that's the next generation, which kind of goes a little more beyond just the what does the law require me to do, which it's still, I mean, obviously it's tied to a law, but it goes to that next level thing about what's the right thing to do and why is the law going in that direction. And it's really about, because individuals have a right to privacy and that right to, protect some of that. So I think it's kind of that hybrid piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I always wonder about, or one thing I'm monitoring is enforcement, because GDPR came up, and I remember the 2 years headed up to GDPR, it was a huge question mark about, I think most of the big players, if you were Facebook or Google, you're pretty much bracing for some enforcement. But if you're a small player, maybe not, or there was questions about enforcement. Then you come to California, they're the first state to stand up an enforcement body. That's not even rolled out yet. So I think people are still wondering how much enforcement can they do, because they were given a relatively low budget to enforce. HIPAA, Health and Human Services has done a moderate job of enforcing. I think that actually has a little bit of a stick to it. So people have some healthy
got a pretty
fear.
Decent stick to it. Yeah.
So what's your sense for like all of these state by state, like Colorado, Virginia? Does it need to have enforcement attached to it for people to take it seriously, or do you think people are like, where is that?
I mean, mixed feelings on that, just in the sense that, let's take for an analogy to your question about like, does it have to have immediate enforcement? Sunshine Act, if you're familiar with that one. The Federal Sunshine Act came out in, I think it was 2013, 2014. I should know the exact date, but it was like the first year that Sunshine Act was enforced. That's when, medical device and pharmaceutical manufacturers had to report all spend on covered recipients, right, to the government. We have to report it to CMS. And it's, public, and it's there actually for patients. That's what the purpose of it is, so that patients can basically shine the light, on any spend to their physicians or teaching hospitals, because they want their patients to be able to know, was the decision of my doctor really in the best interest of me, or is it, influenced by, any money that my doctor gets from, a pharmaceutical company or a medical device company. There's no other prohibitions on sunshine. It's a common misunderstanding. People always say, oh, we can't do this because of sunshine. Sunshine doesn't restrict anything. It just says you've got to report everything, right? So, you have to report all this stuff. And then if you don't report everything in a timely manner, well, yes, then come the restrictions, and, then obviously all the data can be used for data mining, which is happening now. But point being with all this, Sunshine has been around since 2014. Last year, 2021 or 2020, I think it was 2021, was the first time there was actually like a Sunshine Act violation, that the government for the first time like reported a violation of Sunshine Act, saying, hey, this was not in compliance with Sunshine Act. And this has been around for 7 years now at this point. And every company kills themselves to get the Sunshine Act report in, because it is a pain in the rear end, if you will. Trying to censor myself. This report, any company who's ever done their Sunshine Act report knows that this thing is a monster to get in. And there's companies that have like staff of 20 and 30 just to do their Sunshine report every year, because it's that much work. And nobody ever gets in trouble for it. There's no penalties for it. Like, nothing has ever been enforced.
Yeah. So companies are acting in good faith, it sounds like.
Right.
Like, that's pretty good.
No, I mean, it's all visible. You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of back and forth between the government and all this stuff. And now there's data mining that happens. But this is the first time the government has used the stick with it of, hey, we're going to hit you for a Sunshine Act violation. And so with these other ones, if there's no violations right away, will people still adhere to it? I think so, because everybody's still in that mindset of, well, do you want to be the first? What happens if you are, if you are violating it? And because there's so many private right of actions now, I think people still will.
The thing I wonder about is, I was talking to Daniel Sullivan about like dark patterns and Metaverse, and some of this stuff that's like we're barely figuring out the technology, so probably several steps ahead of the regulatory environment. So with dark patterns, for example, the idea that companies can look at your browsing behavior, what you look at on YouTube, your social media habits, and just kind of build profile on you without you necessarily knowing it, and maybe even know things that you don't know about yourself. So they might make connections between, oh, you're a sports fan, so you probably like this kind of clothing, something like that.
Mhm.
But there's all sorts of theoretical dark patterns that emerge on individuals, and I don't think we really know what the big data companies are building on people or the types of profiles, if they're doing so at all, which I imagine they are. And then you extrapolate down into something like Metaverse, where like you're living a whole life digitally, and theoretically anything could be captured on you. And I think the chances of us doing a good job in short order to regulate something like that's probably pretty low. So do you
Yeah.
see an opportunity for do you see any self-regulation happening there, or no?
No, partly because I just think it would be too hard for us to figure it out. Um, I mean, I think sure there's codes of conduct that could, potentially come up, but who's going to implement that? What group's going to, take the reins on that? Two, how would it even be put into place, to your point? How would we get there? And three, if I, go back to the, world of health law, obviously it's my default. It's what I know. So I'm going to keep going back to that one. Um, we've been talking about the need for federal privacy legislation for God knows how long, right?
Yeah.
And it's years later and we're still not there because we can't figure out how to even land on one federal privacy legislation. And because it's taking us so long to get to a federal privacy legislation, one, it's causing tension between the US and, other countries, because that's part of the challenge they're having with us and data transfers. Two, it's also causing a lot of strife between companies and how we operate within the US, because we keep getting subject to more different, state laws coming up, which is really complex when you operate within the US, of trying to comply with all these different states when they all have different requirements. And yet we operate businesses across the US. And we're trying to just ask for a federal legislation, but we can't get to a federal legislation because we all can't agree on what should be in there, what shouldn't, what's health data, what's versus just privacy data. And we can't even get to what's privacy data versus health data. Should all health data just be covered by HIPAA? But HIPAA is different than all health data. And when you start like drilling down into each, peeling back each layer of the onion, every time we get into the next layer of complexity, people are like, oh, this is just too hard. We'll figure it out later.
Yep.
And that's just staying in one category of health law. And where you went, it was a really great question, but it was like 10 times more complex than just health law. And we've got people in place to come up with the legislation for federal privacy legislation, and we still can't get there.
When I think about this stuff, so I think about like cell phone use. I think about Alexa and Hey Google and all the listening devices in your home that are very useful, but are also listening and transcribing conversations theoretically. I think about Metaverse. I think about all these technologies that exist today that even my kids are using because they're fun and they're useful. And and I'm a little surprised that I haven't changed my behavior more than I have, knowing that stuff.
Yeah.
Have you, like, as a privacy professional, do you think it impacts the way you maybe use your cell phone, or what apps you prefer, or if you have a listening device in your home for productivity purposes? Do you change anything, just kind of knowing what you know and being privacy conscious?
I do, like, to a certain extent. I mean, we have Alexas all the time, in like every room in our house. I actually have to like look around and be like, wait, which room am I in? Can I say Alexa in this room, or do I have to say Echo in this room? Otherwise it's going to start responding to me. So you may definitely have that. It does make my life easier. Not going to lie, every once in a while, you do freak out because you're watching TV and all of a sudden she just responds and you're like, wait, where did that come from? And that makes you think twice. But, we try to do the little things that are safer on social media. Like my husband and I share one account, so we try to limit the number of accounts we have. We just share one, and it's, friends we know only. Whenever we get like the random requests, we're like, nope, we don't accept requests from any people we don't know. If it's somebody that we haven't talked to in 20 years, we're like, sorry if it sounds cruel, but there's reason we probably haven't talked to you in 20 years. We don't need to have like 10,000 friends just to say we do, because there's a lot of, sometimes like scammers that pretend to be, people that are just trying to, get access to your information.
Mm-hmm.
So we're, mindful of those kind of things. We're always telling our family members that, like, hey, be mindful of people on Facebook that will set up fake profiles, so you don't access those kinds of things. Everybody loves the Facebook quizzes. So we always tell people, like, look, if you want to take the Facebook quizzes, never take any one that you have to log in or share your credentials for. Just take the ones that you can take quickly, but you don't have to share anything for. And don't post it to your profile. Just take it because you're interested in finding out the answer. And then share your own answer in the comments, but don't ever, actually post it, because, I always tell people, I'm like, watch out because of the Cambridge Analytica, whole ordeal. And some people are like, what? And I'm like, okay, the fact that you don't know that is mind blowing. But that the Cambridge Analytica ordeal to me is a great example, besides the personal use thing, of one of the big challenges that privacy professionals have compared to business. One of the privacy professionals from Facebook actually went and said the quote that it's the people whose job it is to protect the user are always fighting an uphill battle against people whose job it is to make money for the company, because they had flagged, that issue as saying, hey, there's like this loophole in the Facebook API and this could cause an issue. And business people were like, no, it's fine. It's fine. And it's that, constant kind of battle that can happen.
And just in case someone doesn't know what we're talking about. So in the Cambridge Analytica situation with Facebook, there was an instance where if you took a quiz there's a lot of activities you could do, but one example is if you took a quiz, that would grant your profile data, and I think the data of your friends as well,
and your friends didn't even have to take the quiz.
Right. So it could be whoever created the quiz, your data plus your friends' data were now accessible to the creator of that quiz. So Cambridge Analytica, understanding that was fair use, like Facebook had created it for that purpose, created a bunch of quizzes, and that's how they ultimately gather data on individuals and use that for mining purposes. So there's little loopholes like that, probably in all software that we know. That's just one that became very public. So so in that case, how do you think privacy professionals can fight that? Because if you look at GDPR, there's the privacy impact assessment where you're supposed to look and say, hey, does this impact negatively the rights and freedoms of individuals because we're doing such and such privacy thing? But when there's huge profit motive to do certain things, and maybe even in instances where it's core to your business model to do that thing, do you see a path for privacy professionals to do anything about it? Or is it just going to get swept under the rug over and over again?
I think the challenge with that is you don't always win the battle. I mean, as a privacy professional, your job is to, raise the flag and say, hey, yes, this is raising a red flag. This is, not in line with, whatever the reg is, whatever this is. This wouldn't pass GDPR. This wouldn't pass this, insert reg here, because I don't know how many regs this would be lawful by. Somewhere down the line, depending on where you're at. And at the end of the day, and this is a lesson I had to learn earlier on in my career that was harder to swallow then, but I've come to at least understand it more so now. You're not always a decision maker. As the privacy professional, you're not always a decision maker, but it's your job to say, hey, I'm raising the flag and telling you this is what the risk is. But the business, if they're accountable for that decision, you're raising it to them, and it should be on them to say, oh, hey, I don't want to cross that risk. I don't want to do something that could potentially be unlawful or come back as being not permitted later. So I shouldn't take this step. I should partner with you to say, is there a way we can make this lawful? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And by the way, as a privacy professional, if you're a good privacy professional, you should try to find a way to not just say, hey, you can't do this, but is there a way we can find a way to do this? And sometimes the way it's proposed, you can't, but you should try to find a way to to be a good business partner. So don't just be the one pointing out the problems, but try to find the solutions when you point out the problem. And then your business is going to be more willing to work with you. But remember at the end of the day that it is the business that's accountable for the decisions. And if they make the decision that you feel is a wrong decision and they keep making it repeatedly, well, then maybe you're not in the right place. But just do your job. What your job is to do is to outline what the risk is and try to prevent a appropriate solution.
Yep. I got to think, in the optimist in me, I think in the long term, we have some hope in terms of self-regulation and actual regulation. Because if you look at what happened with Facebook, that's a lot of bad press. And I think I heard recently they had the first, and not to beat up on Facebook, they're a huge organization with cutting edge tech, but I think there was a quarter recently that for the first time in its history, they had like a reduction in number of users, which was pretty bad for them. And there was like a little stock price hit right after that. And I will bet their vendors, I'll bet anyone who's doing business with them is asking a lot of questions. Regulators are certainly all over their case at this point, and a lot of bad press. So I think that is an example of the market reacting to behavior, which 10 years ago when Facebook was doing this, probably just didn't have the foresight to understand the implications because it was cutting edge tech. So if you're creating a company now, my guess is the next social media company that becomes a major giant, or the one of the future that's built on like blockchain technology and decentralization or something, if you can imagine that, they'll probably take privacy a lot more seriously and might even be able to acquire some significant market share because of that feature itself. Because my kids and your kids are probably going to be digital natives and think about privacy a different way.
Yeah. And that's what I try to I tell the business, I'm like, sometimes when our first answer is the really compliant answer, and they'll respond with, oh, but we're going to lose business, or, this account or this doctor or whoever isn't going to want to work with us if we are giving the conservative, compliant answer. And, you try to respond with, well, maybe we lose this one account, but down the road at some point, we will pick up 2 or 3 accounts because we're doing things the right way. At the end of the day, people want to work with a compliant company. They want to work with a compliant account. They want to work with a compliant person because the cost of non-compliance always outweighs the cost of compliance. And at some point, people who were cutting corners, it always comes up. And to your point, and I'm not, again, defaming Facebook here or saying that they were cutting corners. I'm not in any way implying that, but they did get a couple penalties, and it did cost them, and now they're rethinking and they're trying to change how they're doing a lot of things. And then some other big names like Microsoft and others are really trying to say, hey, before a ton of penalties come at them, hey, we're trying to move all of our data to Europe. We're trying to do all of these things. We're trying to do it all the right way because they want to lead with compliance and they want to lead with doing it the right way and be a leader of compliance and privacy rather than wait for penalties.
I think it's reframed conversations and privacy too, because most times you can accomplish the desired business objective without doing anything weird with the data. So, for example, maybe I'm creating a mobile app and you can pretty much collect anything you want on one of these phones. You can collect accelerometer data, GPS data, it's pretty much endless. And I was in a conversation recently where they were talking about just that fact. And the privacy chief privacy officer in that situation was like, hey, well, we can accomplish this business objective without collecting any of that. So let's just not collect it. And if we need it for a business purpose later, then we will. And there was zero pushback. The engineers and everybody were just like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But he did exactly what you said is, bring a problem, but also a solution and recommendation that moves the business forward. And I thought this kind of fly on the wall listening into the conversation. I was like, man, that was pretty good. Well done there. And they got their way. But if you went back 10 years, I don't think those conversations were happening because it was just easier to collect all the data. So there's definitely some positive momentum, I think, just because it's in the forefront of everyone's mind. Next thing. So you told me about an organization, and I'm going to butcher this. I think it's called IPMPC. Is that right?
Yes.
And
yes.
I asked you if there was like a great organization, because I think when people think privacy, the one I mostly know about is IAPP, but I know there's lots and lots of other good organizations doing great work. And you brought up IPMPC. So can you talk a little bit about that? What is it? What do they do?
Yeah, so IPMPC, I've got to like do it myself. Yeah, like IPMPC. It was like International Pharmaceutical Medical Device Privacy Consortium. That's it. Like I've got to like spell it out myself multiple times. So what they are is it's a private group. Yeah, you pay a membership fee to be a part of. And Faegre Drinker is the law firm that helps kind of sponsor it, if you will. And it's a collection of different pharma companies, med device companies, diagnostic companies that are collectively part of this membership. And just weekly and biweekly, really drill down on all sorts of different privacy topics. And it's specific to, because it's specific to, again, healthcare space. From my point of view, it was just so extremely helpful because it broke down all the different privacy topics exactly from my lens that I needed to be in. Because
Yep.
IAPP is a great resource for sure, but IAPP would just be a broad lens. So IAPP was like the umbrella of, oh, hey, here's GDPR and here's the new SCCs and here's what we need to know. And IPMPC would go, oh, and here's what we need to know exactly from the healthcare company lens. And now we're going to have a working group that breaks those down into developing templates, developing a TIA template, developing literally like, what are we going to do for the model clauses? How are we going to get through how to do our like DPAs for each one of these? How are we going to do like a presentation to execs on all of these? Like we had a specific working group just on SCCs and how to roll all those out. They did the same thing for CCPA. And so all the working group members and all the member companies, everybody got templates for everything. And so you saved so much in all the legal fees, like, sorry, outside counsel, just by being a part of this organization, because we all work together on developing all these templates and you could like have all these resources and they have it for all the different jurisdictions. There's Asian Pacific working group, a European working group, Latin America working group, because let's say you're focusing on Brazil. I mean, Lord knows that there's enough privacy laws going down there. When PIPL came out, same thing. All sorts of, working groups and templates coming out of how to work with that one. So it's super specific and it's really helpful because our space is so regulated that it's just instant access as to like how to work on those things. And because so many of the member companies were ones that you were going to be negotiating with and against in getting contracts across the line, you knew that a lot of the templates we were going to be using were going to be stuff that they were going to be using too. So it made negotiating contracts a lot easier because everybody was going to be working off the same kind of PIA templates and transfer impact assessment templates.
Awesome. Well, if you miss that acronym, what I'll do is I'll link to that organization in the YouTube description, or if you listen to this on a podcast or something, I'll put it in all the descriptions so people can get access to that. So thank you for sharing. That's definitely the kind of stuff people need. Kate, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun for me and I had a good time. It was great being here today.
Hey, thank you for watching Tuesday Morning Grind podcast. If you like content just like this from cybersecurity executives, thought leaders, hackers, then come on over to risk360.com. Check out our resource center where we have blog posts, white papers, videos, all for free that can teach you about cybersecurity. If you want to know more about cybersecurity certifications like ISO 27001, SOC 2, PCI, High Trust, and others, we have a ton of content on that. So whatever you're looking for, we have a lot of resources. Head on over to risk360.com, shoot us a note, and we look forward to keeping the conversation going.